We are speaking today with former member of Knesset, public intellectual, and likely the most authoritative voice on the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, known as UNRWA, to comment on the dramatic development in Israel yesterday. I am speaking of Einat Wilf, who made herself available to discuss with the state of Tel Aviv earlier today, on Tuesday, and on a last-minute request, no less, the passage of 2 laws in the Knesset yesterday. These laws state that Israel will no longer cooperate with UNRWA in any manner, and furthermore, the state makes it a criminal offense for any Israeli citizen to work cooperatively with UNRWA. As is well known, after 1 year of war with Hamas, UNRWA officials and employees in the Gaza Strip participated fully in the massacre of October 7th and the aftermath. UNRWA teachers and other employees held Israeli civilians captive in their homes. Some were tortured, including children. Perhaps some still are held captive by UNRWA employees. In fact, when Yahya Sinwar was cornered by the IDF recently in Rafah, he was with 2 other armed men, his bodyguards. One of those men was an UNRWA teacher. We will include in the program notes links to previously published work exposing UNRWA as the farce that it is. UNRWA is not a legitimate humanitarian organization, not by any measure. Now, let's get to the heart of the matter with former MK Einat Wilf, who is also the co-author with Adi Schwartz of the seminal work on the history and reality of UNRWA. Their book, published in 2020, entitled The War of Return: How Western Indulgence of the Palestinian Dream Has Obstructed the Path to Peace, is absolutely essential reading for anyone who wants to understand this core issue. I'm Vivian Berkovich, former Canadian ambassador to Israel, and now working hard to keep up with the insane pace of life and loss in the Middle East. Stay with us. Einat Wilf, former member of Knesset, expert, unparalleled on UNRWA and all things UNRWA. Thank you so much for making time for State of Tel Aviv on such short notice, given what's developed this week.
Sure, with great pleasure.
So you have all of the relevant experience to help understand, unpack, and put into context these very dramatic developments in the last few days in Israel. I have to admit, I wasn't aware that there was this particular legislation involving UNRWA in the mix and was somewhat surprised to read the news yesterday and the outcome. Tell us, what was this law? What does this law that Knesset passed yesterday do with regard to UNRWA?
So the Knesset passed yesterday 2 laws. The smaller one basically says that UNRWA cannot operate in sovereign Israeli territory, which really just means at this point Jerusalem. So it's not that important. It's symbolic. And, some people will also argue that where UNRWA works in Jerusalem is not legitimately sovereign Israeli territory, but fine. That's the less important law. The more important one is the one that basically says that Israel is ending its voluntary cooperation with UNRWA and essentially letting go of any privileges that it gave UNRWA to operate in the West Bank and Gaza as part of this voluntary cooperation, and it actually criminalizes Israeli cooperation with UNRWA. So that's what the law says. In order to understand the background, before 1967, UNRWA's areas of operations are the West Bank, Gaza, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. This is where there are Arab refugees. Now, at that point, Israel is not in control of any area where UNRWA operates. After 1967, Israel is in control of the West Bank and Gaza. It's a 6-day war. It's very fast. Israel comes into all these territories within 6 days. So what Israel agrees to do, and kind of the midst of all the craziness is to say, okay, in the West Bank and Gaza, there's this organization, UNRWA. They provide social services. We're just going to cooperate with them. So there's an exchange of letters, which basically says, we're going to cooperate. It's voluntary. Each side can announce within a week that they're done cooperating. But for now, we're cooperating. This temporary arrangement, like everything in the region, lasted for until now, basically. And a lot of people were under the mistaken impression that Israel must cooperate with UNRWA. This is like some treaty obligation, but it's not. It's a voluntary cooperation. And basically what the legislation does is say, we're done. And that's actually, it was voluntary. And now the desire no longer exists. So we're done.
Okay, let me ask you with respect to the UNRWA headquarters in East Jerusalem. The way you presented it initially is the two laws. Yes. And my assumption, of course, is that those headquarters, those premises would fall under what you call the first law, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that I read earlier today that Israel is no longer allowing UNRWA to operate out of those headquarters. Is that correct?
So that would be the implementation of the law. In this law, I must say, I don't know what are the specifics of, like, do they throw them out? Do they not allow them to come in? I think it pretty much assures that, right now they're exempt from all kinds of municipal taxes. So that might end. So I must say, I'm not familiar with the kind of nuts and bolts of what does it mean to say that they cannot operate in Jerusalem, especially since the definition in the law doesn't say Jerusalem. The law says UNRWA will not operate from sovereign Israeli territory. And I can assure you that the immediate response will be, this is not sovereign Israeli territory. So here I'm less aware at how this will be carried out. And the challenge to it is very obvious. UNRWA is just going to claim that this is not sovereign Israeli territory.
It does seem to me to be an obvious flashpoint that we will be focused on in the days to come. So, Einat, what we have with respect to the second law, as you pointed out at the beginning, is a situation where Israel says, you know what? We've been cooperating voluntarily for decades with UNRWA. We choose not to continue to do so at this time. And we have 2.5 million Palestinians in Gaza in quite dire circumstances after 1 year of war. There's a large population of Palestinians in the West Bank, of course, as well as Israelis living there. UNRWA is very active in both those territories, in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip, providing a whole range of services. We won't get into the legitimacy or not at the moment. What's the immediate impact? What does this mean? The timing that Israel has chosen is obviously intentional. There's an army unit or division called COGAT, and their main function is to coordinate humanitarian activity, interaction, cooperation with UNRWA and others in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Now we're in the midst of this war. We're saying we're not cooperating any longer. What's the pragmatic impact of this?
Okay. So in order to understand the effect itself, one needs to understand that UNRWA, despite the continuing allure and power of the letters UN, is actually a Palestinian organization. So the people who work in Gaza and the West Bank are Palestinians. When people hear UNRWA and they say, oh, they're providing services or aid in the West Bank and Gaza, they imagine some lovely Swedes and Norwegians who have rushed to Gaza to help people in need. And what they do not understand, and that shows you the power of the letters UN, is that everyone in Gaza and the West Bank who works for UNRWA, except really for a few people, but the people who carry out the work are Palestinians. This is not Jürgen and Carolina, who are now in Gaza. It is Ahmad and Fatma. Now, the Palestinians in Gaza who are providing the UNRWA services, let's say the teachers who go into the schools, they remain there. Israel doesn't cooperate with them. They're going nowhere. It's not that they're going back to Sweden. They're staying in Gaza. they can still do their job. They can teach the kids the next day that Palestine from the river to the sea will be free. Nothing changes in that aspect. Even the delivery of supplies. These are Palestinians. Again, it's not some foreign body that delivers the supplies. When people say, oh, Hamas hijacks the supplies, I'm like, no, it's all the same. Hamas takes the supplies and divides them in a way that serves its survival purposes. But it's all Palestinians. They can still do their job. No one takes away their capacities to distribute food or to teach. What it takes away is the Israeli cooperation with the lie that this is somehow a legitimate organization or that this is truly some kind of UN aid organization. So it just takes one more element away from the lie. And basically what Israel says is like, whatever we're doing with you as Palestinians, there's a teacher in the West Bank, they want to go the next day and teach, they can still go teach the next day. But let's say they want a special visa, they want some kind of privilege, it's no longer going to be accorded to them. They want to cooperate with Israel, they cannot do that as UNRWA. They can do it as a regular Palestinian. Maybe they can do it through the PA. But the notion that they have these privileges, these rights, these special dispensation, that goes away.
What other privileges? Just to give us some concrete idea as to what this means for the day-to-day. So you just said, well, if there's a teacher and they require a special visa to travel or to go back and forth, I suppose, between maybe West Bank and Jerusalem or within the West Bank, that would have been very easily granted under this. Can you give us other examples of how UNRWA's operations might be impacted? Or is this really kind of much ado about nothing?
Various contracts, for example. UNRWA contracts a lot with Israeli suppliers. They will no longer be able to contract with Israeli suppliers. They'll have to find a way to contract again, maybe through the Palestinian Authority, maybe independently, but they no longer have this kind of umbrella that separates them from the Palestinians as such. They are now, shall we say, exposed as the Palestinians that they are, rather than kind of enjoying the cover as if it's like some foreign entity.
And the main message then, if I can summarize from Israel, is we're no longer going to play our part in this farce, in pretending that UNRWA is a legitimate humanitarian organization.
Precisely. In many ways, it is also a very symbolic gesture. This is also why it's important that it passed with such broad support in the Israeli parliament. It makes it harder to say, oh, big bad Netanyahu. You actually see that this enjoys a broad consensus in Israeli society. But it goes deeper than that. Over the years, when I would meet with foreign dignitaries, politicians, diplomats, I could take apart any argument they would make in favor of UNRWA, except one. When they would say, what do you want from us? Your government is asking us to fund this organization. Your government, your military, COGAT, is telling us that UNRWA is a source of stability in the region. So this is the one argument that is true. And I had nothing to say. So to be able to say, look, the Israeli Knesset, the one body in Israel that is directly elected and represents the people, said, no, we're not cooperating with this organization. They are actually our enemies. They are our executors. So we will no longer give you the cover that allows you to pretend that they're not our executors. We're telling you who they are. We're done selling illusions to ourselves. And now we're going to make it hard for you to tell this story that this is a good organization.
I really appreciate you setting out the historical or recent historical context so clearly, because I remember vividly when I arrived in 2014 as Canadian ambassador to Israel. I was appointed and working with Prime Minister Stephen Harper who, as you know, had very strong opinions on UNRWA. And in fact, he pulled all Canadian funding of UNRWA. What shocked me was learning at the time that the Israeli government and institutional kind of interests were advocating fiercely for us to, on the one hand, put down UNRWA publicly, on the other hand, keep financing and supporting what you call the illusion. And I think that so much of the work that has led to this moment, which is extraordinary, is because of the tremendous effort you have put into exposing UNRWA, very Sisyphean task, you pushing that boulder up the mountain.
But the boulder made it to the mountain.
Einat, I tip my hat to you because I'm not sure that I ever thought that we would see this day. And I think it's really important. We'll now see what the backlash is internationally because it's probably coming, but who knows? And of course, we acknowledge the tremendous contribution over the years of Hillel Neuer, my fellow Canadian, who is your stalwart comrade in arms. Congratulations, because this really validates your work. And I know it's been an uphill battle. And I expect and hope that in the not too distant future, the world will also thank you.
Thank you. It's very kind.
Thank you so much, Einat. Really appreciate this.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap. I thought that if I had questions this morning when I read about the passage of this law, so do my listeners. It's a busy week in the Knesset. Stay tuned for an upcoming discussion with religious Zionist MK Simcha Rotman, as well as more from Einat Wilf on the brewing war over Israel's draft law, or draft dodger law, depending on who is speaking. We'll be dropping that later this week. You can find us on Instagram at State of Tel Aviv, all one word, or on Twitter at State of TLV, all one word. Thanks for being here. Until next time, stay safe. We love hearing from you, so please comment on our website, stateoftelaviv.com, or send us a note to hello@stateoftelaviv.com. On behalf of the State of Tel Aviv core team, Jan Szabo, our creative, graphic, visual, and marketing man, Amir White, producer and editor extraordinaire, sound guy, who is also impressively patient with me and my boomer tech deficiencies, and our social media manager, who pitches in on everything, Maya Naftalin. Thanks to the team. Thanks to you for being here. We'll be back soon.